Chapter 7 is about exponents. So the first rules we're going to practice are 0 and negative exponents. So if I have 0 as an exponent, then that means that anything to the 0 power is equal to 1 as a whole number. So for example, 4 to the 0 power is 1 as a whole number. Negative 3 to the 0 power is 1 as a whole number. 5.14 to the 0 power is 1 as a whole number. We're also going to work on negative exponents, and if I have a negative exponent, you want to think about changing it in terms of where it's at in the fraction. So for example, if I had a to the negative second, and I want to make that become positive because I will always need positive exponents, I will first change it into a fraction by putting it over 1, and then I will move it in terms of where it's at in the fraction. So if it was on top, I would put it on the bottom. So that means that a to the second is now on the bottom. There was a 1 that was in front of there, so that's why there is a 1 still up top. Another example might be if I had 1 over x to the negative third. If this is a negative exponent and I'm trying to make it become positive, I move it in terms of where it's at in the fraction. So that means I would need to move it to the numerator in order for it to become positive. So x to the third would move to the top. There's an invisible 1 that's in front of that x, which would be what's left on the bottom. Alright, let's look at some examples. So my first one says 9 to the negative second. So I always have to simplify, which means I can't have any negative exponents, I can't have anything to the 0 power. So once again, I have 9 to the negative second, so I'm going to change it into a fraction. So I'm going to put it over 1, and then I'm going to move that whole term to the opposite spot that it was in the fraction. So that means that now I would have a 1 in place of the top, and then that 9 squared will go to the bottom. Now I will go ahead and simplify and evaluate those expressions, so it will become 1 over 81. The next one says negative 3.6 to the 0 power. Well, remember, anything to the 0 power is just 1 as a whole number. Alright, let's take a look at another one. So here I have, on letter A, 4 to the negative third. I would want to change that into a fraction, so I put it over 1. Then I would move that whole term to the denominator. So that means that it would become 1 over 4 to the third power. Now remember, when I move it, that exponent becomes positive. Then I'm going to go ahead and evaluate 4 to the third, which would become 1 over 64. Let's take a look at letter B. Negative 5 to the 0 power. Anything to the 0 power is just 1 as a whole number. So that would be my answer. You're going to pause the video and try the next 3. So on letter C, I have 3 to the negative second. So I would want to put that over 1, and I would move that whole thing to the denominator. So it would become 1 over 3 to the positive second power. Then I would evaluate 3 to the second, which is becoming 1 over 9. Now if you do not know your exponent buttons, let's take a look at your calculator. So on your calculator, in the first column, this is called the caret key, this upside down V, and that's how you're going to put in an exponent. So if I wanted to put in 3 squared, I would type 3, hit that exponent button, and then 2, and that will take care of 3 to the second power. If I want to do 5 to the third, sorry, wrong button, 5 to the third, I would type it in like that using the caret key, and then that would take care of your powers. So if you don't know what these evaluating of the powers are, make sure you're using your calculator for that. Alright, letter D, 6 to the negative first. So I would change it into a fraction by putting it over 1. Then I would move that whole thing to the denominator. So it would be 1 over 6 to the first. Then I would evaluate 6 to the first would just become 1 over 6. Last one. Now this one's tricky because I have a negative base, so I would put that over 1. The whole thing goes to the denominator. However, the only thing that will change signs is the exponent. So notice my base stays the same number. It didn't change. The exponent is where it will change signs. Now I will evaluate. It is crucial that in your calculator you type in the parentheses around the -4. So notice, when I do parentheses around the -4, I have a +16. But if you don't put in a parenthesis around the -4, notice my answer is a -16. So make sure you put parentheses when you're typing that in, otherwise you won't get the correct sign. So then my final answer would be 1/16. All right, let's take a look at some more examples. Okay, up here at the top, I have 5a cubed and b to the -2nd. So I would put that all over 1, and then I would only move the terms that have a negative exponent. So the b is the only one that has a negative exponent, so it will move. So notice that the 5 and the a cubed are going to stay on top together because they don't have negative exponents. And then I would only move the b squared. Okay, let's take a look at the next one. I have 1 over x to the -5th. It's already in fraction form, so I'm going to move the things that have a negative exponent. So that would be the x term. So that x to the 5th will go to the top, and then there's an invisible 1 that's already in front of the x that will replace the bottom. So you can just write it as x to the 5th, or you can write it as x to the 5th over 1. Alright, let's pause the video and have you try A, B, and C. Alright, on letter A, you should be changing this into a fraction, so you're putting it over 1. That whole thing needs to move to the denominator, so it should be 1 over x to the 9th to simplify. On letter B, notice the negative exponent is in the denominator, so now you're going to shift it to the top in order for the exponent to become positive. So now it's going to be n cubed over 1, or you can just have it as n to the 3rd. On letter C, I'm going to put it over 1, and the only one I'm going to move is the one with a negative exponent. So the only term that has a negative exponent is that C. So the 4 and the B will remain on top. The C is what will move to the bottom. So that is the only term that I'll want to move. Okay, let's take a look at letter D. Think to yourself, which things would I need to move? Well, the A is the only one with a negative exponent, so it will need to move. The 2 doesn't have a negative exponent, so it's going to stay where it's at. So that means I would have 2 on top, and I would have the a to the 3rd on top. Now you can write it as 2a cubed over 1 because there's an invisible 1 in front of that a that would still be down there, or you can write it as just 2a cubed. Alright, last one. You have n to the -5th over m squared. The only thing with a negative exponent is the one on top. So that is the only one that will be moving. So for my fraction, I have an invisible 1 that's still on top, and then the m squared is going to stay on bottom. The n to the 5th has to move to the bottom with that m. So this is how you would write your answer. Okay. It's important for you to see lots of examples, so that's why I've taken the time to show you that second set. Now there's one more kind of problem, and that's when you're going to evaluate. So what you're going to do is, evaluating means I'm going to substitute in, and then I'm going to solve it out. Well, one way you can do that is, you can go ahead and simplify this expression. So remember, if I wanted to take this negative exponent and make it become positive, I would move it to the denominator. So I did just that. Now evaluate means I'm going to plug in 2 where I see an S, and I'm going to plug in a -3 where I see a T. So that was my next step. S became a 2, T became a -3, everything else stayed put. Now I'm going to do order of operations. So I'm going to do exponents first. So I'm going to do 2 cubed, which is 8, and then I still have 3 times that on top. And then I'm going to type in my calculator -3 squared, which is 9. Now I'm going to multiply 3 times 8, which is 24, and then the 9 is going to stay in the bottom. then I would need to check if it would simplify. I could divide both of those by 3. So 24 divided by 3 would be 8, and 9 divided by 3 would be 3. So my final answer would be 8/3. Okay, let's take a look at another one. Letter A in the got a question says n to the negative fourth and w to the 0 power. It's kind of hard to see, so make sure you fill that in if you need to. So my first thing is I would simplify. So I would put it over 1. The w to the 0 power would just become 1. Oh, wait a minute. I have the wrong exponent. I can't even read it. This is a 2, not a 0. Sorry about that. And it's a negative 2. Oh, that's an n. Man, I'm so sorry. Okay, let's try again. This says w to the nth power. So I'm going to replace the n with a negative 2 there. So now I have n to the negative fourth and w to the negative second. Then I'm going to simplify it so that my exponents become positive. So that means n to the fourth has to move to the bottom, and also w squared has to move to the bottom. So now I have 1 over n to the fourth and w to the second. Then is where I'm going to substitute in. It tells me up at the top that n is negative 2, so I would put negative 2 in the n spot, and 5 is w, so I'm going to substitute that in as well. Now I'm going to use my calculator and type it in with parentheses. So I would do negative 2 to the fourth, which is 16, and 5 to the second, which is 25, and then multiply those two together, so I would get 1 over 400. Alright, on the next one, I have n to the negative first over w to the second. So the first thing I would do is I would go ahead and simplify it. So I would move that n to the denominator, and then I would substitute in negative 2 and 5. So negative 2 goes in for n, and then w becomes a 5. So then I would simplify. Negative 2 to the first is negative 2, 5 squared is 25, and then multiply. So I'd have negative 1 over 50. Now I'm going to have you try the next one. So this next one says n to the 0 power over w to the 6th. Alright, so you should have n to the 0 power becomes 1, so that's just 1 as a whole number. W to the 6 isn't going to change. So then I would put w in as 5, and then I would do 5 to the 6th power, so I would get 1 over 15,625. Okay, try the last one as well. So on the last one, I would simplify, so w to the negative first would need to move to the top. So I would get w over n to the first. Then I would simplify, so I would put in 5 for w and negative 2. And then if I have them both to the first power, it would still stay as 5 over negative 2. Okay, there's a lot going on with these exponents, and you will find out that there's just different kinds of varieties of problems that you can do. So the best thing to think about is always check if you have evaluated as far as you can, have you taken care of all the 0 exponents, and have you taken care of all the negative exponents.